Baby saw a German shepherd crying under a giant statue. What happened next? Left. Everyone in tears. The 5-year-old boy stood frozen, his small hand pressed against the cold bronze of the giant soldier statue. What he discovered underneath would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone in Riverside forever. Don't forget to like, share, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Tommy Rivera wasn't like other children. While his kindergarten classmates chased butterflies and played tag in Veterans Memorial Park that misty Tuesday morning, Tommy stood alone beside the towering bronze statue, his head tilted at an odd angle. His mother Maria watched from the bench, her coffee growing cold in her hands as she observed her son's peculiar behavior. Something was wrong. Tommy's shoulders were shaking, and when he turned slightly, she could see tears streaming down his face. "Tommy, baby, what's wrong?" Maria rushed over, her sneakers squeaking against the dew-covered grass. The morning fog still clung to the trees around the park, making everything look like a watercolor painting that had been left in the rain. Carlos, Tommy's father, looked up from his phone where he'd been checking work emails, immediately alert to the distress in his wife's voice. Tommy's small finger pointed beneath the massive statue. "Mama, he's crying," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant sound of traffic from Main Street. "He's been crying for so long, and nobody helps him." Carlos jogged over, his face creased with concern. The statue loomed above them, 30 feet of bronze depicting Sergeant James Mitchell, rifle in hand, forever frozen in a moment of valor. The plaque at its base read simply, "For those who gave everything." The statue had been unveiled 6 months ago, a tribute to the local hero who died saving civilians in Afghanistan 3 years prior. But there was nothing beneath it except concrete and carefully maintained grass. "There's nobody there, buddy," Carlos said gently, crouching beside his son. His knees popped as he lowered himself, a reminder that 40 was approaching faster than he'd like. "Maybe you heard the wind? It makes funny sounds sometimes when it goes through the trees." Tommy shook his head violently, his dark hair flying. "No, Papa." "Listen? Really listen." Maria and Carlos exchanged the look that parents share when their child does something that doesn't quite fit into the normal box of childhood behavior. Tommy had always been different, not in any way that doctors could identify. They'd checked. He hit all his milestones, scored normally on tests, played and laughed like any other 5-year-old. But sometimes, just sometimes, he knew things he shouldn't know. Like when their neighbor's cat was sick before it showed any symptoms, or when he'd insisted they not take their usual route to school one day. And later, they learned about the massive accident that had occurred right where they would have been. "Please, Papa," Tommy begged, pulling on his father's hand. "We have to help him." Carlos sighed and allowed himself to be dragged closer to the statue's base. The morning was still quiet, just a few joggers in the distance, and an elderly man feeding pigeons near the fountain. As they approached the statue, Carlos heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it. A whimper, low and pained, coming from somewhere near the ground. "What the hell?" Carlos muttered, then quickly added, "Sorry, buddy. Don't repeat that word." Maria joined them, and all three began searching around the statue's base. The bronze soldier stood on a marble platform about 4 feet high, with decorative stonework around the edges. It was Tommy who found the opening, a small gap where the marble had shifted, probably from the ground settling. It was barely visible unless you were looking at exactly the right angle, and it was definitely too small for a person. Tommy dropped to his knees without hesitation, pressing his face close to the gap. "Hi," he whispered into the darkness. "It's okay. I'm here to help." A low growl emanated from within, but it was weak, more warning than threat. Maria grabbed Tommy's shoulder, trying to pull him back. "Tommy, no! There could be a rabid animal in there." But Tommy resisted with surprising strength for such a small boy. "He's not sick, Mama. He's sad and hurt. And he's been waiting for someone for so long." Carlos pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, angling it to shine into the gap. 2 amber eyes reflected back at them, and slowly a shape became visible. It was a dog, a German shepherd by the looks of it, though its coat was matted and dirty. The animal was pressed into what looked like a small cavity beneath the statue, a space that shouldn't exist according to the memorial's blueprints. "Jesus," Carlos breathed. "How long has it been in there?" The dog shifted slightly, and they could see it better. Even in the poor light, it was obviously in bad shape. Its ribs were visible through its coat, and one of its front paws was held at an awkward angle. But what struck Maria most was the intelligence in those eyes. This wasn't some feral stray. This was a dog that had known love, had been someone's companion. "We need to call animal control," Maria said, already reaching for her phone. "No!" Tommy's voice was fierce, almost angry. It was so unlike him that both parents froze. "They'll take him away. They'll put him in a cage and he'll die. He told me." Carlos knelt beside his son, his voice gentle but firm. "Tommy, dogs can't talk. You know that." Tommy turned to his father, and the look in his eyes made Carlos's words die in his throat. It was an ancient look, too knowing for a 5-year-old face. "Not with words, Papa, but I can feel what he feels. And he's so scared. His name is Scout." "How could you possibly know his name?" Maria asked, though even as the words left her mouth, she remembered all the other times Tommy had known things he shouldn't. "He showed me," Tommy said simply, as if this explained everything. "In pictures in my head. His person called him Scout, and Scout is waiting for him to come back." The German shepherd, Scout, had gone very still, his eyes fixed on Tommy, with an intensity that made Maria shiver. There was something happening here that she didn't understand, something that made the rational part of her brain want to deny what she was seeing. But the mother part, the part that had watched her son for 5 years and seen the special way he had with living things, that part believed. "Okay," Carlos said slowly. "Okay, let's think about this. The dog, Scout, is injured and needs help. We can't just leave him here. But we can't force him out either," Maria added, watching the way Scout pressed himself further back when Carlos moved. "He could bite if he's scared enough." Tommy scooted closer to the gap, lying flat on his stomach on the cold, damp ground. Maria's immediate instinct was to pull him away. His good school clothes would be ruined. But something made her hold back. Tommy extended one small hand very slowly toward the opening. "Scout," he said softly, "I know you're waiting for James, but James can't come back, not the way you want him to." Both parents gasped. James Mitchell. That was the name of the soldier the statue commemorated. How could Tommy know that? They'd never discussed it with him. Scout made a sound that was almost like a sob, if dogs could sob. His head lowered, and suddenly he looked not dangerous, but utterly, completely heartbroken. "But there are people who love you," Tommy continued, his voice steady and sure. "People who've been looking for you. And James wouldn't want you to stay here, hurt and alone. He'd want you to be brave, like he taught you." The dog's ears perked slightly at this, and he lifted his head to look directly at Tommy. For a long moment, boy and dog stared at each other, and Maria could have sworn something passed between them, some understanding that transcended species. Very slowly, Scout began to move forward. He was limping badly, favoring his right front paw, and each movement seemed to cause him pain. But he came, inch by inch, until his nose was just at the opening. Tommy didn't reach for him, didn't grab. He just held his hand steady, palm up, and waited. Scout sniffed Tommy's hand, then, with infinite care, licked his fingers once. "That's good," Tommy whispered. "You're so brave. James would be proud." Behind them, footsteps approached. Maria turned to see an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a park volunteer vest. It was Ellen Hartley, the town librarian who also helped maintain the memorial. "Is everything all right?" Ellen asked, then stopped short when she saw what was happening. "Oh my lord, is that a dog under there?" "We found him," Carlos explained quickly. "He's injured and scared. We're trying to coax him out." Ellen's hand flew to her mouth. "Wait, a German shepherd?" She moved closer, trying to get a better look. When she saw Scout's face, she gasped. "I know this dog! Oh my God, I know this dog!" Everyone turned to look at her. Ellen's eyes were filling with tears. "That's Scout! Sergeant Mitchell's dog. He went missing the day of James's funeral. Sarah, James's widow. She searched everywhere for him. It nearly broke her completely, losing both of them." "The funeral was 3 years ago," Maria said, confused. "But the statue's only been here 6 months." Ellen nodded, wiping her eyes. Scout must have come here when the statue was unveiled. Maybe he recognized James somehow. Dogs can sense things we can't. He's been waiting, Tommy said quietly. Every day, he comes here when the sun comes up and leaves when it gets dark. Except today. Today he couldn't leave because his paw's too hurt. Carlos stood up, decision made. We need to get him out and get him help. Ellen, do you have Sarah Mitchell's contact information? I do, but... Ellen hesitated. She moved to the other side of town after James died. Couldn't bear to stay in their old house. And she's got a baby now. James never got to meet him. She was only a few weeks pregnant when he deployed for the last time. Tommy had managed to get his whole arm into the gap now, gently stroking Scout's head. The dog's eyes were closed, and he was leaning into the touch like it was the first kindness he'd felt in months. Scout, Tommy said, there's something else, isn't there? Something you're protecting. The dog's eyes snapped open, instantly alert. He looked at Tommy, then back into the darkness of his hiding place, then back at Tommy again. What do you mean, honey? Maria asked, though she was learning not to question her son's strange insights. He has something important. That's why he won't leave, even though he's hurt. He's guarding it. Scout made a soft whining sound and carefully began backing up into the cavity. They heard scraping sounds, like something being dragged across concrete. Then Scout reappeared, and clutched gently in his mouth was a small, weathered bundle wrapped in what looked like an old military jacket. He won't give it to me, Tommy said, not reaching for it. It's not for me. It's for someone else. Ellen was already on her phone, scrolling through her contacts. I'm calling Sarah. She needs to know. She needs to see this. While Ellen made the call, Carlos ran to his truck to get the emergency blanket he kept there. Maria stayed with Tommy, watching in amazement as her son continued to communicate with Scout in that wordless way that seemed as natural to him as breathing. The bad men came, Tommy said suddenly, his voice distant. After James died, they came looking for something. Scout saw them at the house, going through James's things. That's why he took this and hid. What? Bad men? Maria asked, alarmed. Tommy shrugged. Scout doesn't know their names. But they scared him. They smelled wrong, like danger. Carlos returned with the blanket and a bottle of water. He poured some into his cupped hand and offered it to Scout, who lapped at it gratefully. The dog was clearly dehydrated along with everything else. Sarah's on her way, Ellen announced, putting her phone away. She broke down crying when I told her. She's bringing James Jr. That's her baby. Well, he's 6 months old now. They settled in to wait, Carlos and Maria sitting on the ground beside Tommy, who never stopped his gentle ministrations to Scout. Other park visitors began to notice something was happening, and a small crowd started to gather, though Carlos waved them back to give Scout space. 20 minutes later, a blue Honda pulled up to the park's edge, and a young woman got out. Sarah Mitchell was 28, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and eyes that held a grief that had aged her beyond her years. She was carrying a baby in a carrier against her chest, and her hands were shaking as she approached. Scout heard her before he saw her. His whole body went rigid, and a sound emerged from his throat that was part whine, part howl, and completely heartbreaking. He tried to stand, to run to her, but his injured paw wouldn't hold his weight, and he collapsed. Scout! Sarah cried, dropping to her knees beside the statue. Oh my God, Scout! My brave boy! The dog was crying. There was no other word for it. Tears were actually running from his eyes as he army crawled out of the gap, dragging his injured paw, still clutching the bundle in his mouth. He reached Sarah and pressed his head against her legs, his whole body shaking. Sarah wrapped her arms around him, sobbing into his matted fur. Where have you been? I looked everywhere. I thought I'd lost you too. Scout pulled back slightly and very carefully placed the bundle in front of Sarah. She looked at it, confused, then began to unwrap the military jacket. Inside was a collection of items, dog tags, a watch, a small notebook, and a sealed envelope with her name on it in James's handwriting. These are James's things, she whispered. But how? These went missing from the house right after the funeral. The police said it was probably just opportunistic thieves, but they never found who did it. Scout took them, Tommy said quietly, to keep them safe. He knew the bad men wanted them. Sarah looked at the 5-year-old boy, seeming to really see him for the first time. How do you know that? He told me, Tommy said simply. Not with words, but I can understand him. Instead of dismissing this as childhood fantasy, Sarah studied Tommy's face carefully. James always said Scout was special, that he could sense things others couldn't. Maybe Scout found someone else who could understand him. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter, and, as she read it, her face went pale. "What is it?" Ellen asked gently. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. James knew something might happen to him. He says in the letter that if anything seemed wrong about his death, I should look for a USB drive he hid. He said Scout would know where it was. She looked at Scout, who was now trying to stand again despite his injury. "Scout, where is it, boy?" Where did James hide it? Scout looked at Tommy, as if asking for help. Tommy closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with startling clarity. "He's trying to show me," Tommy said. "There's another place. Under something old. Something with..." He paused, his face scrunched in concentration. "Something with wings?" Sarah gasped. "The angel. The old angel statue in Riverside Cemetery. James's grandfather is buried there. We used to take Scout there all the time to visit." "But that's 2 miles from here," Carlos said. "Has Scout been traveling between here and there?" "Every day," Tommy confirmed, checking on both places, making sure everything is safe. But today, his paw finally gave out. Maria had been quiet, processing everything, but now she spoke up. "Sarah, what did James know? What's on this USB drive?" Sarah clutched the letter tighter. James was investigating something. His unit was assigned to guard a contractor named Victor Nash. James discovered Nash was selling weapons to insurgents, playing both sides. James reported it, but nothing happened. Nash had too many connections. James was gathering evidence on his own when... She trailed off. "When he was killed in action," Ellen finished softly. "Except maybe it wasn't just action," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "Maybe Nash arranged it." The crowd around them had grown larger, and murmurs rippled through it. This was no longer just a story about a loyal dog. This was about murder, conspiracy, and a hero who might have been silenced for trying to do the right thing. Scout suddenly tensed, his hackles rising despite his weakened state. He growled, low and warning, his eyes fixed on something beyond the crowd. Everyone turned to look. A black SUV with tinted windows had pulled up to the park. 2 men in dark suits got out, their faces hidden behind sunglasses despite the overcast morning. They began walking directly toward the group around the statue. "Those are the bad men," Tommy said, his voice very small. "Scout recognizes their smell." Sarah instinctively clutched her baby tighter. Carlos stood up, placing himself between the approaching men and his family. The crowd seemed to sense the tension and began to back away, though several people had their phones out, recording. "Mrs. Mitchell," one of the men called out as he approached. His voice was professionally pleasant, but there was something cold underneath. "We heard you found your husband's dog. We're so glad. We've actually been looking for him ourselves." "Who are you?" Sarah demanded. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We work for Nash Security Solutions. Mr. Nash was very fond of Sergeant Mitchell and wanted to make sure his dog was well cared for. We'd like to take Scout to our private veterinary facility." "Like hell you will," Carlos said, stepping forward. The second man moved his hand slightly, just enough to reveal the gun holstered under his jacket. "Sir, I'd advise you not to interfere in private business." Scout was growling louder now, trying again to stand despite his injury. Tommy wrapped his small arms around the dog's neck, and Scout immediately quieted, though his eyes never left the men. "This is a public park," Ellen said loudly, her librarian voice carrying the authority of someone who had shushed thousands of people over the years. "And there are dozens of witnesses here. I suggest you gentlemen leave before someone calls the police." "We have legal documents," the first man said, reaching into his jacket. Several people in the crowd stepped back nervously, but he only pulled out a folder. "Mr. Nash owns the copyright to all of Sergeant Mitchell's military records and effects. That includes his military working dog." "That's impossible," Sarah said. "Scout was James's personal dog, not military property." "Actually," the man said, his smile growing wider, "Scout was purchased and trained using funds from Nash Security Solutions as part of our support for American troops. We have the receipts. Legally, he's company property. It was a lie. Sarah knew it. Everyone there knew it. But legal documents could be forged, judges could be bought, and Nash had the money to do both. "No!" Tommy's voice rang out clear and strong. "Scout doesn't belong to anyone. He's not property. He's family." The second man took a step toward Tommy, and Scout exploded into motion despite his injuries. The German Shepherd launched himself at the man, all teeth and fury, 90 pounds of protective rage. The man went down hard, his sunglasses flying off, revealing eyes wide with fear. "Get him off!" the man screamed, but Scout had his arm in his jaws, not breaking skin, but holding firm, growling continuously. The first man reached for his gun, and the crowd erupted in screams. But before he could draw it, Carlos tackled him, both men crashing to the ground. The gun skittered across the grass. "Call 911!" someone shouted, and multiple people already had their phones out. Tommy stood in the middle of the chaos, tears streaming down his face. "Scout, no! You'll hurt yourself worse." At the sound of Tommy's voice, Scout released the man's arm and limped back to the boy, collapsing at his feet, panting heavily. Blood was seeping through the fur on his injured paw. Police sirens were already approaching. The response time was quick given that the station was only 6 blocks away. The two men from Nash Security scrambled to their feet. The one who'd been tackled pointed at Carlos. "You assaulted me. I'll have you arrested. You drew a weapon in a public park full of children," Ellen said calmly. She held up her phone. "And I have it all on video, as do about 20 other people." The men looked around at all the phones pointed at them, at the angry faces of the crowd that had initially backed away but now pressed closer, emboldened by numbers and outrage. "This isn't over," the first man said, straightening his tie. "Mister, Nash doesn't give up easily." They retreated to their SUV just as 2 police cruisers pulled up. What followed was an hour of statements, confusion, and bureaucracy. The officers took everyone's information, collected video evidence, and tried to make sense of the situation. Scout was loaded carefully into an animal control van, not to be taken away but to be transported to the emergency veterinary clinic. Sarah rode with him, refusing to leave his side again. Tommy wanted to go too, but Maria convinced him that Scout needed doctor time first. As the crowd dispersed and the police finished their work, the Rivera family found themselves alone by the statue again. Tommy looked up at the bronze soldier, his face thoughtful. "Papa," he said, "James is still here, kind of. Not like a ghost, but like an echo. He's in Scout, and in the statue, and in his baby, and he's glad Scout isn't alone anymore." Carlos didn't know what to say to that, so he just picked up his son and held him tight. Over Tommy's shoulder, he saw Ellen approaching with a younger woman he didn't recognize. "This is Detective Rachel Morgan," Ellen said. "She's not with the local police. She's state police, and she's been investigating Nash for 2 years." Detective Morgan was in her 30s, with sharp eyes and an air of competence. She showed them her badge. "I've been trying to nail Victor Nash for arms dealing, but he's slippery. This situation with the dog and the USB drive James Mitchell supposedly hid. This could be the break we've been looking for." "How did you know to come here?" Maria asked. "I've been monitoring Nash Security's communications," Morgan admitted. "When they mobilized to come here, I followed. I saw the whole confrontation. Your son was very brave." Tommy, still in his father's arms, turned to look at her. "Scout says you're good. He can smell it. You smell like justice." Detective Morgan blinked, clearly taken aback. "The dog told you that?" "Not with words," Tommy said patiently, as he'd been explaining all morning. "But I understand him." The detective studied Tommy for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. "I've seen stranger things in my career. And right now, I need all the help I can get. Would you and your family be willing to help me find what James Mitchell hid?" Carlos and Maria exchanged glances. They'd wanted a quiet morning at the park. Instead, they'd stumbled into something that felt bigger than all of them. "We'll help," Carlos said, "but our son's safety comes first." "Understood," Morgan said. She handed him her card. "I'm going to the veterinary clinic to check on the dog and Mrs. Mitchell. Can you meet me there in an hour?" As the detective walked away, Tommy tugged on his father's shirt. "Papa, we have to hurry. Scout showed me something else. The bad men aren't just coming for him. They're going to the cemetery tonight. They're going to dig up the angel." Maria's blood ran cold. How could they know about the angel? Tommy's face was grave beyond his years. Because someone told them. Someone who was supposed to be James's friend. The fog had lifted completely now, revealing a gray sky that promised rain. The bronze statue of Sergeant James Mitchell stood tall and proud, forever watching over the park. But Tommy knew, in that way he knew things, that James's real legacy wasn't in bronze. It was in a loyal dog's determination to complete one last mission, in a widow's courage to face the truth, and in a small boy's gift that might just be the key to justice. "We should go," Tommy said quietly. "Scout needs us. And the story isn't over yet." As they walked back to their car, none of them noticed the figure watching from the tree line. Someone who'd been there the whole time, someone who'd heard everything, someone who was already making a phone call that would change everything. The veterinary clinic was a chaos of controlled urgency when they arrived. Dr. Amy Patel, the head veterinarian, met them in the waiting room. She was still wearing surgical scrubs with small spots of blood on them. "Scout's stable," she said immediately, seeing the worry on their faces. "The paw was badly infected, and he's malnourished and dehydrated, but he's a fighter. He's sedated now, while we treat him." Sarah was in the observation room, her baby sleeping in the carrier against her chest, her eyes never leaving Scout's still form on the operating table. She looked up when the Riveras entered and tried to smile. "Thank you," she said to Tommy. "I don't understand how you did it, but you brought him back to me." Tommy walked over to the window, placing his small hand on the glass. He never really left. He was just keeping his promise to James. Detective Morgan arrived shortly after, carrying a tablet and looking grim. "I've been doing some research. Nash Security Solutions has contracts worth millions with the Department of Defense. But there have been whispers for years about weapons going missing, about shipments that don't match manifests. James Mitchell wasn't the first to notice, but he was the first to try to do something about it. And they killed him for it," Sarah said flatly. "We can't prove that yet," Morgan said carefully. "Officially, James died in an ambush while protecting civilians. But the timing is suspicious. He filed his report about Nash exactly 1 week before the ambush." Ellen, who had followed them to the clinic, spoke up. "I've been thinking about the angel statue at the cemetery. I volunteer there too, maintaining the historical records. That statue is over 100 years old. It marks the grave of James's great-great-grandfather, also a soldier. But here's the interesting part. There's a time capsule buried beneath it." Everyone turned to look at her. "A time capsule?" Morgan asked. Ellen nodded. "It was placed there in 1920, meant to be opened in 2020. But with COVID and everything, it was forgotten. The cemetery board only remembered it this year. We were planning to open it next month in a ceremony." "James would have known about it," Sarah said slowly. "His grandfather told him stories about the family history all the time. He would have known there was a sealed container under that statue that no one would disturb." Tommy, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke. "Scout says James went there the night before he deployed. Scout watched him dig a small hole beside the capsule and put something inside. A black box, waterproof." Morgan was already on her phone. "I need a warrant for Riverside Cemetery, specifically the area around the Mitchell family plot." She paused, listening. "Yes, I understand it's consecrated ground. This is connected to a potential murder investigation." Another pause. 1 hour? Good. She hung up and turned to the group. "We have a problem. My sources tell me Nash's men are mobilizing. They might try to get there first, warrant or no warrant." "Then we go now," Carlos said. "Warrant or not." "I can't officially endorse that," Morgan said carefully. "As a law enforcement officer, I have to follow proper procedures." She paused meaningfully. "However, there's nothing stopping private citizens from visiting a public cemetery to pay their respects to a fallen soldier." The message was clear. They needed to get there first, even if it meant Morgan couldn't officially be with them. "I'll stay with Scout," Sarah said. "But please, find what James hid. He died trying to protect it." Dr. Patel spoke up. "Actually, Scout is waking up. We gave him a mild sedative, but he's fighting it. He seems agitated about something." They looked through the window to see Scout's eyes opening, his head lifting despite the cone around his neck, to prevent him from licking his bandages. When he saw Tommy, he whined and tried to stand. "He wants to come," Tommy said. "He says we need him. He's the only one who knows exactly where James buried it." "Absolutely not," doctor," Patel said. "That dog needs rest and recovery, not a trip to a cemetery." But Scout was already struggling more violently, pulling at his IV line. His heart monitor began beeping rapidly. "He's going to hurt himself worse, doctor," Patel said, rushing into the treatment room. Tommy followed her, despite Maria's attempt to stop him. He went straight to Scout, placing both hands on the dog's head. "I know," he whispered. "I know you need to finish this, but you have to let us help you." Scout immediately calmed, though his eyes remained alert and focused. He looked at Tommy, then at the door, then back at Tommy. "Okay," Tommy said, "but you have to ride, not walk. Deal?" Scout huffed, which seemed to be agreement. Dr. Patel threw up her hands. "This is insane. But fine. If you insist on taking him, I'm coming too. Someone needs to monitor his condition." She began preparing a portable medical kit. "And if he shows any signs of distress, we're bringing him straight back." 20 minutes later, they had formed an unlikely convoy heading to Riverside Cemetery. Carlos drove his truck with Maria, Tommy, and Scout in the back seat, the dog's head resting on Tommy's lap. Dr. Patel followed in her van with her medical equipment. Detective Morgan, who couldn't officially join them but happened to be in the area, followed at a distance. Sarah, despite wanting to come, stayed at the clinic with her baby, Ellen keeping her company. The cemetery was old, dating back to the Civil War. Ancient oaks draped with Spanish moss created a canopy over weathered headstones. The Mitchell family plot was in the older section, marked by the angel statue Ellen had described. It was beautiful in a melancholy way. A life-sized angel with spread wings, her face tilted toward heaven, tears carved into her stone cheeks. "She's crying," Tommy said softly. "Like Scout was." They parked and Carlos carefully lifted Scout from the truck. The dog was alert but weak, his injured paw wrapped in thick bandages. As soon as his feet touched the ground, though, he seemed to gain strength. He limped directly toward the angel statue with such purpose that the humans had to hurry to keep up. Scout went to a specific spot about 3 feet from the statue's base, near a small headstone that read, "Colonel William Mitchell, 1875 to 1960, Semper Fidelis." He began pawing at the ground with his good paw, whining urgently. "Here," Tommy said. "It's here." Carlos had brought a small camping shovel from his truck. He began digging carefully, mindful of the sacred ground he was disturbing. The earth was soft from recent rain, making the work easier. About 18 inches down, the shovel hit something hard. "Got something," he said, digging more carefully around the object. It was a military ammunition box, waterproof and sealed with tape. Carlos lifted it out, brushing off the dirt. There was a piece of paper taped to the top, protected by clear packing tape. It read, "If you're reading this, something happened to me. Everything inside needs to go to someone who can't be bought. Trust Scout. He knows. J.M." "James knew," Maria whispered. "He knew they might come for him." Carlos was about to open the box when Scout suddenly went rigid, a growl building in his throat. Through the cemetery gates, 3 black SUVs were approaching, driving fast enough to kick up gravel. "They're here," Tommy said, his voice tight with fear. "The bad men are here." Detective Morgan's voice crackled over the radio she'd given Carlos. "I see them. I'm calling for backup, but they're at least 10 minutes out. You need to leave, now." But it was too late. The SUVs screeched to a halt, blocking their vehicles. Men in tactical gear poured out, at least a dozen of them, and stepping out of the middle vehicle was a man in an expensive suit with silver hair and cold gray eyes. Victor Nash himself. "Well," Nash said, his voice carrying across the cemetery. "What an interesting gathering. I'm just here to pay my respects to a fallen hero, and I find people digging up graves. That's vandalism at minimum, possibly grave robbing." "We have permission from the cemetery board," Carlos lied, standing protectively in front of his family. Nash smiled, but it was the smile of a predator. "Do you?" "How convenient. I'm sure you won't mind if my security team verifies that while we wait for the police." His men spread out, surrounding the group. They hadn't drawn weapons yet, but the threat was clear. Scout was growling continuously now, his hackles raised despite his weakness. Tommy had his arms around the dog, trying to keep him calm, but Scout's eyes were fixed on Nash with an intensity that spoke of recognition. He remembers you, Tommy said suddenly, his child's voice cutting through the tension. Scout remembers you at the house, after James died. You were looking for this box. Nash's expression flickered for just a moment. Surprise, maybe, or concern. The child has an active imagination. No, Tommy said, stronger now. Scout saw you. You went through James's things. You threatened Sarah. You said if she had anything of James's that didn't belong to her, she should give it back, or things would get worse for her. That's a serious accusation from a 5-year-old, Nash said, but his men had shifted slightly, nervous. Dr. Patel stepped forward, her phone in her hand. I'm live streaming this. Everything you say and do is being broadcast to over 3,000 people right now. It was a lie. She was recording, not streaming, but Nash didn't know that. His face darkened. Turn that off, he ordered. No, she said simply. This is a public place, and you're threatening innocent people, including a child. One of Nash's men stepped toward her, but Scout broke free from Tommy's grip. Despite his injuries, despite the sedatives still in his system, the German Shepherd placed himself between Dr. Patel and the approaching man, his teeth bared, a savage growl rumbling from his chest. Control that animal, Nash snapped, or I'll have it put down as dangerous. You already tried to put him down once, Tommy said, and everyone turned to look at him. The boy's face was pale but determined. Scout is showing me. You sent men to kill him after James died, because you knew James told Scout things. But Scout was too smart. He hid. He's been hiding for 3 years, waiting for the right time. This is ridiculous, Nash said, but sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool air. Detective Morgan's voice came over the radio again, louder this time, clearly meant to be heard. Nash, I know you can hear this. State police are en route. If you or your men make any aggressive moves toward those civilians, especially the child, it will not end well for you. Nash looked around, calculating. The cemetery was isolated, but not that isolated. Houses were visible in the distance. People walked their dogs on the paths, and Dr. Patel's phone was still recording everything. We're just having a conversation, Nash said smoothly. No law against that. Then let us leave, Carlos said, still clutching the ammunition box. I'm afraid I can't do that, Nash replied. You see, that box contains stolen property, classified military documents that belong to my company. Liar! The voice was high and fierce, and it took everyone a moment to realize it had come from Tommy. The boy stepped forward, and Scout moved with him, their movements synchronized like they were connected by an invisible thread. James wrote down everything you did, all the weapons you sold to the enemy, all the soldiers who died because of you, including James. Nash's composure finally cracked. Shut that brat up! 2 of his men started forward, but Scout wasn't alone anymore. From the tree line, from behind headstones, from all directions, dogs appeared. Not just 1 or 2, but dozens. German shepherds, Rottweilers, pit bulls, Labrador retrievers, all moving with purpose toward the angel statue. Some wore collars, some didn't. Some were clearly pets, others looked like strays. But all of them were focused on the men threatening Tommy and Scout. What the hell? One of Nash's men muttered, his hand moving to his weapon. Don't! Nash barked. You fire a weapon in a cemetery with witnesses and live streaming, and we're done. The dogs formed a protective circle around the Rivera family and Dr. Patel. They didn't attack, didn't even growl. They just stood there, waiting, their presence a silent threat that was somehow more menacing than any display of aggression. This is impossible, Nash said, his voice shaking slightly. Scout called them, Tommy said simply. He told them we needed help, and they came. Animals protect each other. It's humans who forgot how. In the distance, sirens were approaching, multiple sirens getting closer fast. Nash made a decision. We're leaving, he told his men. Now. But sir, the box. Now, Nash snarled. He looked at Carlos, his eyes promising retribution. This isn't over. That box and everything in it belongs to me. I'll bury you in legal battles until you beg to give it back. Try it, Detective Morgan's voice came over the radio. I've got everything you just said recorded, including your admission that you know what's in a box you claim you've never seen. Nash's face went white. He'd been so focused on the immediate threat that he'd forgotten about the detective listening in. Without another word, he turned and strode back to his SUV. His men followed, casting nervous glances at the assembled dogs. As the vehicles pulled away, the dogs began to disperse, melting back into the cemetery as mysteriously as they had appeared. Only Scout remained, and as soon as the threat was gone, he collapsed. "Scout!" Tommy cried, dropping to his knees beside the dog. Dr. Patel was there in an instant, checking his vitals. "He's okay, just exhausted." The adrenaline kept him going, but he needs immediate care. As she worked to stabilize Scout, police cars arrived. State police, not local. Detective Morgan appeared, no longer pretending she just happened to be nearby. "I'll need that box," she said to Carlos. He handed it over without hesitation. Morgan opened it carefully, revealing a USB drive, documents, photographs, and what looked like audio recordings on a small digital recorder. "James documented everything," she said, scanning through some of the papers. Weapon serial numbers, dates, transactions, even photos of Nash meeting with known arms dealers. She looked up. "This is it. This is what we needed to take him down." Tommy was still on the ground with Scout, his small hands gentle on the dog's fur. "He did it," he whispered. "Scout finished his mission." James would be so proud. Scout's tail thumped once against the ground, weak but definite. They transported Scout back to the clinic, where Dr. Patel worked to undo the damage his heroic efforts had caused. The infection in his paw had worsened, and he'd torn several stitches, but she assured them he would recover with proper care. Sarah was waiting for them, tears streaming down her face as she heard what had happened. "He saved James's evidence. He saved everything." Detective Morgan spent the next 3 hours going through the contents of the box with her team. What they found was damning beyond their best hopes. Not only evidence of arms dealing, but proof that Nash had arranged the ambush that killed James, paying insurgents to attack at a specific time and place where James would be on patrol. "We've got him," Morgan said. "Murder, treason, arms dealing. Nash is going away for life." But even as relief washed over them, Tommy remained troubled. He sat beside Scout's recovery kennel, his face serious. "What's wrong, baby?" Maria asked, smoothing his hair. "Scout says it's not over," Tommy said quietly. "There's one more thing. Something Nash is planning. Something bad." Before anyone could respond, Detective Morgan's phone rang. She answered, her face growing increasingly grim as she listened. "Nash is gone," she said after hanging up. "He never went home. His plane is being prepped at the private airfield. He's running." "But you can stop him, right?" Carlos asked. Morgan was already making calls, but her expression was frustrated. "The airfield is in the next county. By the time we get there, he'll be gone. And once he's in the air, he can be in a non-extradition country in hours." Tommy stood up suddenly. "Scout says Nash has to go back to the farm first. There's something there he needs, something he can't leave." "Without what farm?" Morgan asked urgently. Tommy closed his eyes, his hand on the kennel where Scout lay. "The place where the bad things happened. Where Nash made James watch something terrible before he sent him to die." Sarah gasped. "The Morrison farm. James mentioned it once, said Nash had a property where he did his real business. It's about 15 miles from here." Morgan was already moving. "I need units there now." She looked at the Riveras. "You've done enough. Go home. Let us handle this." But Tommy shook his head. "Scout needs to be there. He's the only witness to what Nash did. Without him, Nash might still get away." "Absolutely not," Maria said. "Tommy, you're 5 years old. This is police business now." Tommy looked at his mother with those two old eyes. "Sometimes kids have to be brave too, Mama." Scout taught me that. The argument might have continued, but Scout made the decision for them. Despite his injuries, despite the sedatives, the German Shepherd was standing in his kennel, his eyes alert and focused. He barked once, sharp and commanding. Dr. Patel checked her monitors, shaking her head in disbelief. "His vitals are stable, stronger than they should be. It's like he's drawing strength from somewhere." "From James," Tommy said simply. "James is still here, kind of, in Scout, in the statue, in everyone who loved him. And he wants Nash stopped." It was Carlos who made the decision. "We're going. Not to be heroes, just to be there. Scout deserves to see this through." Morgan looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Scout's eyes stopped her. There was an intelligence there, a determination that transcended species. "Fine," she said, "but you stay in the vehicles." No one gets out except law enforcement. The convoy that headed to the Morrison farm was larger this time. Multiple state police units, Detective Morgan's unmarked car, and Carlos's truck with his family and Scout. Dr. Patel followed with Sarah and baby James Jr., refusing to be left behind. The farm appeared abandoned at first glance, a rundown property with overgrown fields and a dilapidated barn. But Scout knew better. As they approached, he began barking, his whole body tense with recognition. "This is it," Tommy said. "This is where the really bad things happened." Morgan's team surrounded the property, moving in the tactical formation. But Nash had one more card to play. As the first officers approached the barn, an explosion rocked the structure, not big enough to level it, but enough to start a fire. "He's burning evidence!" Morgan shouted into her radio. "Get fire suppression here now!" Through the smoke, they saw Nash's SUV racing away from the back of the property, heading for the tree line, where a dirt road led to the highway. "He's getting away!" Sarah cried, but Scout had other plans. Before anyone could stop him, the injured dog launched himself from the truck bed where he'd been resting. He hit the ground running, his injured paw forgotten, chasing after Nash's vehicle with a speed that seemed impossible. "Scout, no!" Tommy screamed, but the dog was already gone, disappearing into the smoke and chaos. Carlos started to run after him, but Morgan grabbed his arm. "Let my people handle it." But her people were busy with the fire and the potential evidence inside the barn. Nash was escaping, and only Scout was in pursuit. Then, from the tree line, they came again. The dogs. Not just a few this time, but what looked like every dog within miles. They emerged from the forest like a living wave, converging on Nash's escape route. Nash's SUV suddenly swerved, then swerved again. Through binoculars, Morgan could see what was happening. The dogs weren't attacking the vehicle, but they were herding it, running alongside and in front, forcing Nash to slow down and change direction. "They're driving him back," Morgan said in amazement. "They're actually herding him back toward us." And leading them all was Scout, running on 3 legs now, his injured paw held high, but still faster than seemed possible for any dog, let alone an injured one. Nash's SUV burst back into view, dogs streaming around it like water around a stone. He tried to turn again, but more dogs appeared, blocking his path. Finally, surrounded and out of options, the vehicle stopped. Nash emerged, a gun in his hand, his face twisted with rage and fear. "Call them off!" he screamed. "Call off these hellhounds!" "They're not ours to call," Morgan said, her own weapon drawn but pointed down. "Drop the gun, Nash." "It's over." Nash looked around wildly at the circle of dogs. None of them were attacking, but all were watching him with an intensity that was almost human. Scout limped forward, placing himself between Nash and the humans. "This is insane!" Nash shouted. "They're just animals!" "No," Tommy said, his young voice carrying clearly across the distance. "They're witnesses. Scout remembers everything you did, and now he's showing all of them. They all know what you are." For a moment, Nash's gun wavered between Scout and Tommy. It was the moment that would haunt everyone there, the moment when a decorated war hero's dog and a 5-year-old boy stood against a man who'd betrayed everything America stood for. Nash made his choice. He raised the gun toward Tommy. Scout moved faster than thought, faster than his injuries should have allowed. He leaped, his jaws closing on Nash's wrist just as the gun fired. The shot went wide, hitting nothing but air, and Nash went down under 90 pounds of righteous fury. This time, Scout didn't let go until Nash stopped struggling and Morgan's team had him in handcuffs. As Nash was led away, he turned back to look at Scout one last time. "It's just a dog," he said, but his voice was hollow, defeated. "No," Sarah said, stepping forward with her baby in her arms. "He's a hero, just like James was. And unlike you, he knows what loyalty means." The aftermath was swift. The fire was controlled before it could destroy all the evidence. What they found in the barn was horrifying. Not just weapons, but documentation of years of illegal deals, photos of Nash with known terrorists, and records of bribes paid to officials in multiple countries. But what Tommy found, guided by Scout to a hidden compartment in the barn's floor, was the most damning of all. A video camera with a recording still on it. Nash's confession to arranging James's death, recorded as insurance by one of his own men who'd grown a conscience too late. "How did Scout know it was there?" Morgan asked, though she was beginning to accept that some questions didn't have rational answers. James saw Nash hide it, Tommy said simply. His last thought before the ambush was that someone needed to find it. Scout heard that thought somehow, and he's been carrying it ever since. As the sun set over the Morrison farm, now a crime scene that would make national news, the assembled dogs began to disperse once again. They'd come when called by some silent signal, and now their work was done. Only Scout remained, and he was fading fast. The adrenaline that had kept him going was gone, and his body was finally succumbing to the cumulative trauma of 3 years of survival and the injuries of the last day. Dr. Patel worked frantically, but her face was grim. "We need to get him to surgery immediately." They rushed Scout back to the clinic, the whole convoy following. "In the operating room, doctor." Patel and her team worked for hours while the Riveras, Sarah, and Detective Morgan waited outside. Tommy sat silent, his eyes closed, his small hands pressed against the window that looked into the operating room. "What is it, honey?" Maria asked. "Scout is tired," Tommy said softly. "He says his mission is done. James is calling him home." "No," Sarah said fiercely. "He doesn't get to die now. Not after everything. James Jr. needs to know him. He needs to know the dog who saved his father's honor." Tommy opened his eyes and looked at Sarah with that ancient wisdom. Sometimes love means letting go, but sometimes it means holding on so tight that even death has to wait. He stood up and placed his hand on the window. "Scout, you listen to me. Your job isn't done. James Jr. needs you. Sarah needs you. I need you. And somewhere, James is saying the same thing, that your mission isn't over until his son is grown and safe." Inside the operating room, one of the monitors began beeping rapidly. Dr. Patel looked up, her eyes wide above her surgical mask. Scout's heart rate, which had been dropping dangerously, was stabilizing. More than that, it was strengthening. "I don't believe it," she muttered, but she kept working, her hands moving with renewed purpose. The surgery continued for another 2 hours. When Dr. Patel finally emerged, she looked exhausted but amazed. "He's stable," she announced. "I don't know how, but he's stable." His body was shutting down, and then suddenly, Bull wasn't. "It's like he decided to live." "He did," Tommy said simply. "He decided his mission wasn't over." Scout's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. 3 days after the surgery that should have killed him, he was sitting up in his kennel, his amber eyes alert and focused on everyone who entered. Dr. Patel kept running tests, unable to explain how his body was healing at such an accelerated rate. "It's medically impossible," she told the gathered group. The Riveras, Sarah with baby James Jr., and Detective Morgan, who had become a regular visitor. The infection should have taken weeks to clear. His paw tendons were severed, but they are already showing signs of reconnection. "I've been a vet for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Tommy sat beside Scout's kennel, his small hand resting on the metal bars. "He's not done yet," the boy said quietly. "James is helping him heal because there's still something important that needs to happen." Sarah shifted James Jr. in her arms, the 6-month-old reaching toward Scout with chubby fingers. What else could there be? Nash is in custody. The evidence has been turned over. James's name has been cleared. Tommy looked up at her with those knowing eyes that seemed far too old for his 5-year-old face. The other soldiers, the ones who died because of Nash's weapons. Their families don't know the truth yet. Scout says James wants them to know. Detective Morgan pulled out her tablet, scrolling through the files they had recovered. There were 17 soldiers killed in incidents involving Nash's illegal arms deals. 17 families who were told their loved ones died in random attacks. "They deserve to know," Carlos said firmly. "They deserve to know their family members were heroes who were betrayed." Morgan nodded slowly. "I'll arrange meetings with the families. But some of them might not want to hear it. Sometimes believing in a random tragedy is easier than knowing there was a conspiracy." "Scout will know which ones need to hear it," Tommy said with complete confidence. He can feel James guiding him. Over the next week, as Scout continued his remarkable recovery, Morgan arranged for the families to be contacted. The first to arrive was Margaret Thompson, whose son Daniel had served with James. She was a small woman in her 60s, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes carrying the permanent sadness of a mother who had outlived her child. When she entered the veterinary clinic's meeting room, Scout immediately stood up, limping over to her despite Dr. Patel's protests about him needing rest. The dog sat directly in front of Margaret and placed his good paw on her knee, looking up at her with such intensity that she gasped. "This is Scout," Sarah explained softly. "He was James's dog, and he knew Daniel too." Margaret's hand trembled as she reached out to touch Scout's head. Daniel mentioned a dog in his letters, said it was the smartest animal he'd ever seen, could almost understand English. "He can understand more than that," Tommy said, moving to sit beside Margaret. "He's showing me something about Daniel. He says Daniel gave him beef jerky every Friday, the good kind, not the cheap stuff." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. That's impossible? How could you know that? Daniel always bought expensive beef jerky to share with his squad. Said it was his way of bringing a piece of home to the desert. "Scout remembers," Tommy said simply, "and he wants you to know something important about how Daniel died." Morgan stepped forward with the documents. "Mrs. Thompson, what we're about to tell you might be difficult to hear." Over the next hour, they explained everything: Nash's betrayal, the weapons deals, how Daniel and the others had been specifically targeted because they were getting close to discovering the truth. Margaret listened in silence, her hand never leaving Scout's head, tears streaming down her face. "So my boy died because he was trying to do the right thing?" she finally asked. "He died a hero," Sarah said firmly, "just like James. They were all heroes who were betrayed by someone they should have been able to trust." Margaret looked down at Scout, who hadn't moved from his position at her knee. "You tried to protect them, didn't you? You tried to warn them about the danger." Scout whined softly and Tommy translated. "He says he barked and barked the morning of Daniel's last patrol, but the humans didn't understand. He tried to block the door, but they made him move. He's carried that guilt for 3 years. "Oh, sweet boy," Margaret murmured, pulling Scout into a gentle embrace. "It wasn't your fault. None of it was your fault." As she held Scout, something shifted in the room. The air seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. Tommy smiled, a real child's smile for once. "Daniel says thank you," he whispered. "He's been waiting for his mom to know the truth." Margaret looked at Tommy sharply. "What did you say?" "Sometimes they stay close until things are made right," Tommy said, his voice gentle. "Daniel's been watching over you, just like James has been watching over Scout. Now that you know the truth, he can rest." Whether it was imagination or something more, Margaret swore she felt a warmth pass through her, like the last echo of her son's embrace. She left the clinic that day still grieving, but with a sense of closure she hadn't had before. More families came over the following days. Each meeting was different, but Scout seemed to know exactly what each person needed. For some, he was gentle and comforting. For others, he was playful, reminding them of happier times. And for each one, Tommy somehow knew exactly what to say, sharing memories that Scout couldn't possibly have, but did. The story began to spread. Local news picked it up first. Hero Dog helps grieving families find closure. Then, national outlets got involved. Within 2 weeks, Scout and Tommy had become symbols of something larger than themselves, proof that love and loyalty could transcend even death. But fame brought its own problems. It started with a phone call to the clinic. Dr. Patel answered, her face growing increasingly concerned as she listened. "That was a lawyer," she said after hanging up, "representing something called the Prometheus Institute. They say they want to study Tommy and Scout's connection. They're offering a substantial amount of money." "Absolutely not," Maria said immediately. "My son is not a science experiment." But the calls kept coming. Research institutes, government agencies, even entertainment companies wanting to turn their story into a movie. The Riveras had to change their phone number twice, and reporters began camping outside their house. "This is getting out of hand," Carlos said one evening, peering through the curtains at the news van parked across the street. "We just wanted to help Scout. We didn't ask for any of this." Tommy was sitting on the floor with Scout, who had been released from the clinic but was staying with the Riveras during his continued recovery. The boy looked troubled, his hand resting on Scout's back. "Something's coming," he said suddenly. "Scout feels it. Someone bad is interested in us now." Before Carlos could ask what he meant, there was a knock at the door, not the aggressive knock of reporters, but 3 measured raps. Carlos looked through the peephole to see a man in an expensive suit, definitely not press. "Mr. Rivera, my name is Dr. Marcus Webb. I'm from the Prometheus Institute. I believe my colleague called earlier." "We're not interested," Carlos said through the door. Mr. Rivera, I think you should hear what I have to say. It's about your son's safety. Something in the man's tone made Carlos pause. He opened the door, but kept the chain on. What about his safety? Dr. Webb smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Your son has a remarkable gift, but gifts like his attract attention, not all of it benign. We can protect him. We don't need your protection, Carlos said firmly. Don't you? Webb pulled out his phone and showed Carlos a photo. It was Tommy at the park, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. This was taken yesterday. You didn't notice the photographer, did you? There are people very interested in understanding how your son does what he does. Some of them won't ask permission. Carlos felt a chill run down his spine. Are you threatening us? Quite the opposite. I'm warning you. The Prometheus Institute studies extraordinary human abilities. We've been watching cases like Tommy's for years, and we've seen what happens when other, less ethical organizations get involved. Scout had moved to the door, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Tommy stood beside him, his small face set in determination. You're lying, Tommy said clearly. Scout says you smell like the same kind of bad that Nash did. Different, but the same. Underneath, Webb's expression flickered. The dog is traumatized. It's natural for him to be suspicious of strangers. Scout knows the difference between strangers and danger, Tommy said. And your danger. Webb straightened his tie, his demeanor shifting from friendly to cold. Mr. Rivera, I came here as a courtesy. The Institute has legal ways to ensure cooperation when public safety is concerned. A child who claims to communicate telepathically with animals could be considered a matter of national security. Get off our property, Maria said, appearing beside Carlos. Now. Webb handed Carlos a business card. When you realize you need our help, call me. But don't wait too long. Others are already moving. After he left, the family sat in tense silence. Finally, Carlos spoke. We need help. Real help. Detective Morgan, Maria suggested. She'll know what to do. They called Morgan, who arrived within an hour, looking grim. The Prometheus Institute is real, she confirmed. They're a private research organization with government contracts. They study what they call anomalous human capabilities. Like Tommy's gift, Maria said quietly. Morgan nodded. I've made some calls. They can't force you to cooperate, but they have ways of making life difficult for people who refuse them. And Webb is right about one thing. They're not the only ones interested. What do you mean? Carlos asked. There are other organizations, some governmental, some private, some foreign, that would very much like to understand how Tommy does what he does. If it could be replicated, trained, weaponized. Weaponized? Maria's voice rose. He's 5 years old. I know, Morgan said gently. That's why we need to be smart about this. I have a contact, someone who used to work for the Institute but left. She might be able to help. The contact turned out to be Dr. Rebecca Chen, a neuroscientist who arrived the next morning looking like she hadn't slept in days. She was young, maybe 30, with intense dark eyes behind thick glasses. I heard about your son on the news, she said without preamble. I came as soon as I could. The Institute will move fast once they've identified a subject of interest. Subject? Maria's voice was icy. Sorry, their terminology, not mine, Rebecca said quickly. I left the Institute because I disagreed with their methods. They see people like Tommy as puzzles to solve, not children to protect. She knelt down to Tommy's level. Hi, Tommy. I'm Rebecca. I know you can understand Scout in a special way. Can you tell me how it started? Tommy looked at Scout, as if asking permission, then back at Rebecca. It was always there, a little bit. But when I found Scout crying under the statue, it was like a door opened all the way. Now I can hear him all the time, and sometimes other animals too. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. And Scout, he understands you too? Better than most humans do, Tommy said, which made Rebecca smile, despite the situation. The Institute will want to run tests, Rebecca explained to the parents. Brain scans, behavioral experiments, isolation studies to see if distance affects the connection. They'll treat it all very clinically, but for a child, it could be traumatic. Then we refuse, Carlos said simply. It's not that simple, Rebecca said. They'll make a case that Tommy's ability could be crucial for national security. Imagine if we could communicate with military dogs the way Tommy does with Scout. Or if we could understand what animals know about impending natural disasters. They'll paint you as selfish if you refuse. Scout suddenly stood up, his body tense. Tommy's eyes went wide. Someone's here. Lots of someones. They looked out the window to see 3 black vans pulling up to the house. Men and women in suits got out, along with what looked like medical personnel with equipment. "They're moving faster than I expected," Rebecca said, her face pale. The doorbell rang. Carlos didn't move to answer it. It rang again, followed by loud knocking. "Mr. Rivera, this is Dr. Webb. We have a court order requiring Tommy to undergo evaluation for potential public health concerns. Please open the door." "Court order?" Maria gasped. "How is that possible?" Rebecca was on her phone, texting rapidly. "They have judges who owe them favors. The order is probably technically legal, if ethically questionable." "We're not opening the door," Carlos said firmly. "Then we'll be forced to enter." Webb's voice came through the door. "We have law enforcement support." Sure enough, 2 local police cars had pulled up behind the vans. The officers looked uncomfortable, but they were there. Scout moved to the door, positioning himself defensively. Tommy stood beside him, tears streaming down his face, but his jaw set with determination. "They can't take me," he said. "Scout won't let them." But even Scout couldn't fight off a dozen people with a legal court order. Carlos knew they were out of options. Or were they? "Rebecca," he said urgently, "if Tommy demonstrates his ability publicly, completely publicly, would that protect him? If everyone knows about it, they can't disappear him to some lab, right?" Rebecca's eyes widened. That might work. If there's enough public attention, they'd have to be more careful. But it's risky. Once it's out there, you can't take it back. "Do it," Maria said immediately. "Whatever keeps our son safe." Carlos grabbed his phone and opened Facebook Live. Maria did the same with Instagram. Within seconds, they were broadcasting. "My name is Carlos Rivera," he said to the camera. "We're being forced by a private organization to hand over our 5-year-old son for experiments. They claim he has an ability to communicate with animals. We're going to show you the truth, and we need your help to keep him safe." He turned the camera to Tommy and Scout. "Show them, son. Show them what you can do." Tommy looked at Scout, and something passed between them. The dog moved to the window and began pawing at it in a specific pattern. Tommy, eyes closed, began speaking. "Scout is drawing the layout of the Institute's facility. He's never been there, but he's getting the information from a lab dog who escaped from there 3 days ago and is hiding in the woods near our house. The dog's name is Subject 47, but he wants to be called Max." Scout continued his movements, and Tommy kept narrating. "The Institute has been taking people with special abilities for 40 years, most of them children. Some of them never come home. They have a facility underground, beneath a building that looks like a regular office complex. The address is..." The door burst open. Webb and his team rushed in, but Carlos kept filming. "They're here! They're taking our son! Help us!" The live stream was already being shared hundreds of times. Comments poured in. Someone recognized one of the medical personnel. Another identified the judge who had signed the order as someone with financial ties to the Institute. "Turn that off!" Webb demanded, reaching for Carlos's phone. Scout launched himself at Webb, knocking the man backward, not attacking, just preventing him from reaching Carlos. The other team members hesitated, unsure whether to help their leader or grab Tommy. "The world is watching," Maria said loudly. "Everything you do here is being recorded and broadcast. Thousands of people are seeing this." Webb got to his feet, his composure cracked. "This is a matter of national security. You're interfering with a legal order. Your legal order is based on lies," Rebecca said, stepping forward. "I have documents proving the Institute falsified information to obtain it. I've just sent them to every major news outlet." Webb's phone rang. He answered it, his face growing paler with each word he heard. When he hung up, he looked defeated. "We're withdrawing," he said to his team. "For now." As quickly as they had arrived, they left. But everyone knew it wasn't over. The live stream had gone viral. Within hours, #SaveTommy was trending worldwide. News crews arrived, but this time, the Riveras were ready. They held a press conference in their front yard, with Tommy and Scout beside them. Tommy demonstrated his ability in small, controlled ways. having Scout respond to silent commands, translating the dog's reactions to questions, even showing how Scout could lead him to hidden objects without any verbal communication. "My son has a gift," Maria said to the cameras, "but he's still a child. He deserves to grow up normally, to choose how and when to use his ability. No organization, government, or private has the right to take that from him." The public response was overwhelming. Thousands of messages of support poured in. Legal advocates offered their services pro bono. Animal rights organizations rallied to their cause. Even celebrities began sharing their story. But it was what happened next that truly changed everything. A woman appeared at their door 3 days after the confrontation with the Institute. She was elderly, well-dressed, with sharp blue eyes that seemed familiar somehow. "My name is Eleanor Mitchell," she said. "James Mitchell was my nephew." Sarah, who had been staying with the Riveras for safety, gasped. "Aunt Eleanor? But James said you died years ago." Eleanor smiled sadly. "A necessary fiction. I've been in hiding from people like the Institute for 30 years. You see, Tommy isn't the only one with this gift." She looked directly at Tommy, and he gasped. "You can hear them too. All the animals," Eleanor nodded. "It runs in families sometimes. James had a touch of it, which is why he and Scout bonded so deeply. But Tommy, you're the strongest I've ever seen." "Why were you hiding?" Carlos asked. "Because I refused to be a tool for organizations like the Institute. They wanted to use my ability for military purposes, for spying, for things that would hurt innocent people and animals. So I disappeared. But you're here now," Maria observed. "Because Tommy needs training," Eleanor said simply. "The ability you have, young man, it will grow stronger. Without proper guidance, it could overwhelm you. The voices of every animal in pain, every creature in distress, all at once in your mind. I've seen it drive people mad." Tommy looked scared for the first time since this all began. Scout immediately pressed against him, offering comfort. "But with training," Eleanor continued, "you can learn to control it. To use it when you choose, not be used by it. I can teach you if your parents agree." The Riveras exchanged looks. This woman was offering exactly what they needed, a way to protect Tommy while helping him understand his gift. "How do we know we can trust you?" Carlos asked. Eleanor smiled and looked at Scout. The dog's tail began wagging immediately, and he walked over to her, sitting at her feet with obvious affection. "Scout knows me," she said. "James brought him to visit me once, secretly. Scout is the only soul who knew I was still alive. He kept the secret, even from James at the end, because I asked him to." Tommy closed his eyes, communing with Scout, then opened them with wonder. "She's telling the truth. Scout says she's family, real family, the kind that protects each other." Over the next weeks, Eleanor began teaching Tommy, not in some secret facility, but right in their home, with his parents present, with Scout always by his side. She taught him how to filter the voices, how to choose which animals to listen to, how to protect his own mind from being overwhelmed. "The gift is like a radio," she explained. "Right now, you're picking up every station at once. I'm teaching you how to tune in to one at a time." The Institute didn't give up easily. They sent lawyers, tried to discredit the family, even attempted to have Tommy removed from his parents' custody. But each attempt was met with public outcry. Then, story of the boy who could talk to animals had captured the world's imagination, and the world was watching. Detective Morgan, who had become a close family friend, used her connections to investigate the Institute. What she found was damning. Decades of experiments on children with special abilities, many of whom had been traumatized by the experience. The investigation led to congressional hearings and eventually to new laws protecting children with unusual gifts from exploitation. But the most important development came from an unexpected source. One morning, Tommy woke up with a strange expression on his face. "Scout says we need to go to the cemetery, to James's grave. There's something there we need to see." The family, along with Sarah, baby James Jr., and Eleanor, drove to the cemetery. At James's grave, they found something extraordinary. The ground around the headstone was covered with flowers. Not planted flowers, but wild flowers that animals had carried there. Birds, squirrels, even deer had brought offerings to the grave of the soldier who had loved animals. "They remember him," Tommy said in wonder. "All the animals James ever helped, they remember, and they're saying thank you." As they stood there, Scout began to howl, not a sad sound, but something triumphant. Other dogs throughout the town joined in, creating a chorus that seemed to rise to the heavens themselves. "James says thank you," Tommy whispered. "He says his mission really is complete now. The truth is known, his family is safe, and Scout has found his purpose." "His purpose?" Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. Tommy smiled. "To teach others that the bond between humans and animals is sacred, that loyalty and love don't end with death, and that sometimes the smallest among us, kids and dogs, can change the world." In the months that followed, Tommy and Scout became symbols of hope. They visited hospitals where Tommy helped therapy animals better communicate with their patients. They went to schools where Tommy taught children to be kinder to animals. They even worked with military units, helping them better understand and bond with their working dogs. The institute eventually shut down, its leaders prosecuted for various crimes. Dr. Webb disappeared, though rumors suggested he was testifying against his former employers in exchange for immunity. Rebecca Chen started a new organization dedicated to studying special abilities ethically, with full consent and transparency. But the biggest change came a year later, on the anniversary of finding Scout under the statue. The town of Riverside held a ceremony at Veterans Memorial Park. The statue of James Mitchell now had a companion, a bronze sculpture of Scout, sitting alertly at James's feet, forever watching over the park. Tommy was asked to speak at the dedication. He stood at the podium, now 6 years old, but still with those knowing eyes, Scout beside him, despite the fact that the dog's muzzle was now touched with gray. "A year ago, I heard crying under a statue," Tommy began, his young voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "I thought I was just saving a dog. But Scout saved us too. He showed us that love is stronger than death, that truth is stronger than lies, and that sometimes the smallest voice can speak the loudest truth." He looked at Scout, who looked back with those amber eyes full of intelligence and love. "Scout wants me to tell you all something," Tommy continued. "He says every animal has a voice if we're willing to listen. Every creature has feelings, fears, hopes. They're not so different from us. They just speak a different language." Tommy paused, his hand resting on Scout's head. "But here's the secret Scout taught me. You don't need a special gift to understand them. You just need to pay attention. Watch how your dog's tail drops when you're sad, even if you're trying to hide it. Notice how your cat brings you toys when you're sick. See how birds warn each other when danger is near. They're talking all the time. We just forgot how to listen." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word from this remarkable child. "Scout also wants me to tell you about the fighting dogs," Tommy continued, his voice growing serious. "The ones Nash made fight each other. They're healing now, in sanctuaries and homes where people are patient with their fear. Scout says to remember that no animal is born mean. They're made that way by humans who forgot that kindness is strength." He looked at Sarah, who was holding James Jr., now a toddler, who was reaching toward Scout with obvious delight. "And Scout says James is proud of Sarah for being so strong, proud of his son who will grow up knowing that his daddy was a hero, and proud of all of you for not letting his story end with a lie." Scout stood up then, his age showing in the careful way he moved, but his spirit still strong. He barked once, clear and commanding, and every dog within hearing responded. The chorus of barks rippled outward through the town like a wave. "They're saying thank you," Tommy translated. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for remembering that we're all connected, humans and animals, living and dead, young and old. We're all part of the same story." As Tommy stepped down from the podium, the crowd erupted in applause, but he wasn't done. He walked to the new statue of Scout and placed his small hand on the bronze. "One more thing," he called out, and the crowd quieted. "Scout has been telling me something for weeks now, but I didn't understand until today. He says his body is getting tired, but his spirit is still strong. He says he's been holding on to finish teaching me everything James wanted me to know." Sarah made a soft sound of distress, understanding what Tommy was saying before he said it. "But he also says," Tommy continued, tears now flowing down his young face, "that death isn't the end for dogs like him, or for people like James. Love makes them eternal. They just change form, from something we can touch to something we can feel in our hearts." Scout walked slowly to the statue, sniffed it once, then lay down at its base, in the exact spot where Tommy had first found him. He looked up at Tommy with those knowing amber eyes and thumped his tail once against the ground. "Not yet," Tommy whispered, dropping to his knees beside the dog. "Please, not yet." But Scout just leaned against him, offering comfort as he always had. And in that moment, everyone understood that Scout would stay as long as he was needed, but not a moment longer than he should. The ceremony ended with hundreds of people filing past to pay their respects to Scout, many with tears in their eyes. The dog accepted each gentle touch, each whispered word of thanks, with the dignity of the hero he was. That night, Scout slept between Tommy and the statue, under the stars. Tommy stayed with him, their connection stronger than ever. And in the morning, when the sun painted the sky gold and pink, Scout was still there, still breathing, still watching. "He says he's not ready," Tommy told his worried parents. "He says there's one more thing. One more mission." That mission revealed itself 3 days later when a young girl appeared at the park. She was about 8, with haunted eyes and arms covered in defensive scars. Her name was Amy, and she was a foster child who had been through more homes than she could count. She approached Scout tentatively, fear and longing warring in her expression. Scout, despite his age and infirmity, stood and walked to her. He sat at her feet and placed one paw on her shoe, looking up at her with infinite patience. "He says you're special," Tommy told her. "Like me. You can hear them too, can't you? The animals?" Amy's eyes went wide with shock and fear. "Nobody believes me," she whispered. "They all say I'm making it up or I'm crazy." "You're not crazy," Tommy said firmly. "You have a gift. Scout says you're going to help lots of animals and people, but first, you need to learn that you're safe now." Amy looked at Scout, and something passed between them. She dropped to her knees and buried her face in his fur, sobbing years of loneliness and fear into his patient warmth. Scout just stood there, absorbing her pain, offering his strength. "Will you teach me?" Amy asked Tommy. "Will you teach me how to use it without being scared?" Tommy looked at his parents, who nodded. They'd already discussed the possibility of Tommy helping other children like himself. Eleanor had even offered to help establish a proper program. "We'll teach you," Tommy promised. "Scout and I and Aunt Eleanor, you're not alone anymore." Over the next months, Amy became a regular fixture in the Rivera household. Under Tommy and Eleanor's guidance, with Scout as her constant companion, she began to bloom. The frightened, defensive girl transformed into someone confident and kind, her gift, growing stronger but controlled. Scout seemed to gain strength from having a new purpose. His body was failing, everyone could see that, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. He was teaching Amy everything he'd taught Tommy, passing on James's legacy to a new generation. The program grew. Other children with similar abilities were identified and brought to Riverside, not to be studied, but to be trained and supported. The town embraced them all, understanding that these children were not freaks or experiments, but gifts to be treasured. The 1-year anniversary of Nash's arrest brought unexpected news. He had been killed in prison, supposedly by another inmate, though the circumstances were suspicious. Detective Morgan investigated but found no evidence of foul play. Scout, however, seemed unsettled by the news. "He knows something," Tommy told Morgan. "Someone connected to Nash is still out there, someone dangerous." That someone revealed themselves 2 weeks later. A woman arrived in town, elegant and cold, introducing herself as Victoria Nash, Victor's sister. She claimed she wanted to make amends for her brother's crimes, offering to fund the children's program. But Scout's reaction was immediate and violent. The old dog, who had never shown aggression without cause, bared his teeth and growled the moment she approached. "You were part of it," Tommy said, his voice certain. "Scout remembers your scent from the farm. You helped your brother." Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something vicious underneath. "You can't prove anything," she said smoothly. "And unlike my brother, I know better than to threaten children directly." She left, but the threat lingered. Scout became even more protective, refusing to let Tommy or Amy out of his sight. He seemed to be waiting for something, preparing for one final battle. It came on a cold November night. Tommy woke to Scout's urgent barking. The dog was at the window, his hackles raised. Outside, figures moved in the darkness. "They're here," Tommy said, shaking his parents awake. "Victoria's people. They've come for the evidence Scout knows about." But Scout had one more surprise left. As the intruders approached the house, dogs began appearing from everywhere. Not just a few, but hundreds. Every dog in Riverside and beyond, called by Scout's silent alarm. They surrounded the house in a living barrier, their eyes glowing in the darkness. The intruders, faced with an army of protective animals, had no choice but to retreat, but one made the mistake of raising a weapon toward the house. Scout, despite his age, despite his infirmity, launched himself through the window in a shower of glass. The gun went off. Scout fell, but he had done what he needed to do. The gunshot woke the entire neighborhood. Police sirens were already approaching, and the intruders were trapped between the army of dogs and arriving law enforcement. Tommy rushed outside, dropping beside Scout still. Warm blood seeped from a wound in the dog's chest, but his eyes were still open, still aware. "No!" Tommy sobbed. "You can't go." Not like this. Scout's tail moved slightly, the faintest wag. His eyes found Tommy's, and in them was perfect peace. "He says it's okay," Tommy whispered through his tears. "He says this is how James would have wanted it, protecting others, being brave." Sarah had arrived, along with Amy and Eleanor, and what seemed like half the town. They formed a circle around Scout as doctor. Patel worked frantically to stop the bleeding. "He's saying goodbye," Tommy said, his voice breaking. "He's saying thank you to everyone. He says to remember that love never dies. It just changes shape." Scout's eyes moved to each person in turn. Sarah, who had loved James and welcomed Scout back. Amy, who would carry on his legacy. Eleanor, who had kept the family secrets. The Riveras, who had risked everything to help him. And finally, back to Tommy. "He sees James," Tommy whispered. "James is calling him home. He says his mission is complete. The children are safe, the truth is known, and love won." Scout's breathing slowed. His eyes, those intelligent amber eyes that had seen so much, began to close. "Wait," Tommy said urgently. "He has one more thing to say." Everyone leaned in, even those who couldn't hear what Scout was communicating. He says we're all connected. Every kind action creates a ripple. Every moment of bravery inspires another. He says James's sacrifice led to his survival. His survival led to finding me. Finding me led to saving the other dogs and stopping Nash. And that led to helping Amy and the other children. He says one act of love can change the world, if we let it. Scout's eyes closed for the last time, but his tail gave one final, definitive thump against the ground. A period at the end of a beautiful sentence. A final heartbeat of pure love. The silence that followed was profound. Then, one by one, every dog present began to howl, not in grief, but in celebration. They were honoring a hero, sending his spirit home with a song that rose to the stars. Tommy stood, his young face transformed by loss, but also by understanding. "He's not gone," he said to the assembled crowd. "He's in every dog who remembers him, in every child who learned from him, in every person who heard his story and chose to be braver, kinder, better." The funeral for Scout was attended by thousands. People came from across the country to honor the German Shepherd who had saved evidence of war crimes, protected children, and proved that the bond between humans and animals was sacred. He was buried beside the statue in Veterans Memorial Park, next to where he had hidden for so long. The Bronze Scout seemed to watch over the real Scout's grave, eternal guardian to an eternal hero. Victoria Nash was arrested that night, the attempted attack on the Rivera house providing the evidence needed to connect her to her brother's crimes. The network of corruption that the Nash siblings had built finally crumbled completely. But the story didn't end with Scout's death. If anything, it began anew. The Scout Foundation was established, dedicated to training children with animal communication gifts and protecting them from exploitation. Amy became its first graduate, her abilities growing stronger under Tommy and Eleanor's guidance. Tommy himself grew into his gift with grace and purpose. By the time he was 10, he was consulting with wildlife organizations, helping injured animals communicate their needs. By 15, and he was working with law enforcement, using his ability to help find lost children through the eyes of search dogs. But he never forgot Scout. None of them did. Every year on the anniversary of Scout's death, something miraculous happened. Dogs from miles around would gather at the park, sitting quietly around Scout's grave and the statues. They would stay for exactly 1 hour, the length of time Scout had held on after being shot, and then disperse. "They're remembering," Tommy would explain to anyone who asked. "They're honoring him." and they're promising to carry on his legacy of loyalty, bravery, and love. James Jr., as he grew, showed signs of the gift too. Sarah would bring him to Tommy for lessons, and together they would sit by Scout's grave, the boy learning from the teenager who had learned from the dog who had learned from his father. "Uncle Tommy," James Jr. asked one day when he was 5, the same age Tommy had been when he found Scout. "Is my daddy really gone? Is Scout really gone?" Tommy looked at the boy with those same knowing eyes, though they held less sadness now and more wisdom. "What do you think, buddy? What do the animals tell you?" James Jr. closed his eyes, his hand resting on Scout's headstone. A butterfly landed on his finger, and a squirrel chittered from a nearby tree. Birds sang in harmonious chorus. "They say love never dies," James Jr. said, opening his eyes with wonder. "They say Daddy and Scout are in every good thing that happens because of what they did. They're in the foundation, in the kids we help, in the bad people who got stopped. They're not gone. They're everywhere." Tommy smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "That's exactly right. And you know what else? They're proud of you. Both of them." As if in confirmation, a gentle breeze swept through the park, rustling the leaves in a pattern that sounded almost like approval. The bronze statues seemed to gleam a little brighter in the afternoon sun. Eleanor, now in her 80s but still sharp, watched from a nearby bench. "The gift isn't just about talking to animals," she told Sarah, who sat beside her. "It's about understanding that everything is connected. Every life, every action, every moment of courage or kindness." Scout understood that. He lived it, and now these children carry it forward. The Prometheus Institute's former headquarters had been converted into the Mitchell Scout Center for Interspecies Communication. Rebecca Chen ran it with a team of ethical scientists and gifted individuals, studying the phenomenon not to exploit it, but to understand and nurture it. They discovered that the gift was more common than anyone had thought. Nearly 1 in 10,000 children showed some level of ability. Most lost it as they grew older, their minds closing to the subtle communications of the animal world. But with training and support, it could be maintained and strengthened. The impact was global. Children with the gift helped locate survivors in earthquake rubble by communicating with search dogs. They assisted in wildlife conservation by understanding what animals needed to thrive. They even helped solve crimes by interpreting what witness animals had seen. But perhaps the most important change was in how people saw animals themselves. No longer were they just pets or wildlife. They were recognized as sentient beings with their own thoughts, feelings, and wisdom. Animal cruelty laws were strengthened. Factory farming was reformed. The bond between humans and animals, long taken for granted, was finally given the respect it deserved. Tommy, now a young man, stood before the United Nations on the 10th anniversary of finding Scout. He had been invited to speak about the importance of protecting gifted children and respecting animal consciousness. 10 years ago, he began, his voice strong and clear, I heard a dog crying under a statue. That dog was Scout, and he changed not just my life, but the lives of thousands. He showed us that loyalty transcends death, that love conquers fear, and that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages. He paused, looking out at the assembly of world leaders. Scout was just one dog, but he saved evidence of war crimes, protected children, and sparked a global movement. He did this not because he was special, though he was, but because someone listened to him, because a 5-year-old boy believed that his pain mattered. Tommy's eyes found the camera, knowing that millions were watching around the world. Every animal has a voice. Every child with this gift has something important to contribute, and every one of you has the power to listen, to protect, and to make a difference. He smiled, remembering Scout's amber eyes, full of love and determination. Scout's body is gone, but his mission continues in every act of kindness between human and animal, in every child who is allowed to keep their gift, in every moment when we choose compassion over cruelty. So I ask you today, will you listen? Will you protect those who cannot protect themselves? Will you believe that love and loyalty are the most powerful forces in the universe? Scout believed it. He lived it. And he died proving it. The assembly erupted in applause, but Tommy wasn't finished. There's one more thing, he said, and the room quieted. Scout taught me that death isn't an ending. It's a transformation. The body fails, but the love remains, It spreads, it grows, it inspires. James Mitchell died protecting innocence, but his courage lived on in Scout. Scout died protecting children, but his loyalty lives on in every dog who learned from him, every child who heard his story. He looked directly into the camera again. So, if you're watching this and you've lost someone you love, human or animal, know that they're not really gone. They're in every good thing that came from knowing them, every lesson they taught, every moment of joy they gave, every act of love they inspired. That's immortality. That's what Scout showed us. As Tommy stepped down from the podium, he felt a familiar presence. Not Scout exactly, but the echo of him, the ripple of his impact still spreading outward. In shelters around the world, dogs were being adopted because people remembered Scout's story. Children with gifts were being celebrated instead of hidden. And somewhere, in a small town park, a bronze statue stood eternal watch, reminding everyone that love never truly dies. The story of the boy who could talk to animals and the dog who waited under a statue had become legend. But more than legend, it had become inspiration. It proved that connection was possible across any divide, species, death, fear, if we just had the courage to listen. Tommy returned to Riverside to find Amy, now a teenager, working with a group of younger gifted children. She had become a teacher, passing on what Scout and Tommy had taught her. The cycle continued, each generation lifting up the next. "How was the UN?" she asked. "Good," Tommy replied. "But this is better." This is what Scout would have wanted, not fame or recognition, but the work continuing. They stood together at Scout's grave, where fresh flowers had been placed by anonymous visitors, as happened every day. The bronze statue stood above them, eternal guardians of an eternal truth. "Do you still hear him?" Amy asked quietly. "Scout, I mean..." Tommy smiled. "Not his voice, but his message? Every day. In every dog who trusts a human, every child who isn't afraid of their gift, every person who chooses kindness over cruelty. He's not talking anymore, but he's still communicating." A dog barked in the distance, then another, then dozens. Not in alarm, but in greeting. The daily chorus that had continued since Scout's death, the dogs of Riverside honoring their hero. "They remember," Amy said. "They always will," Tommy replied. "And so will we." As the sun set over Veterans Memorial Park, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the bronze statues seemed to come alive in the light. For just a moment, if you looked at just the right angle, you could swear you saw Scout's tail wag, just once, in eternal approval of all that had come from one moment of compassion when a boy heard a dog crying and chose to help. The legacy lived on, the mission continued, and somewhere, in whatever comes, after this life, a soldier and his dog stood watch together, proud of all they had inspired, all they had protected, and all the love they had left behind. Love never dies. It just changes shape. Scout had taught them that, and the world would never forget. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in the sacred bond between humans and animals, if you think every child's gift should be celebrated and protected, then please, like this video, share it with everyone you know, and comment below about your own experiences with the amazing animals in your life. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that will restore your faith in love, loyalty, and the connections that transcend even death. Remember, as Scout showed us, one act of kindness can change the world. What will yours be?